Hi everyone, I'm talking about user interviews today and how to gather and apply feedback for creating better products. I know we're at a 4 p.m. slot, so hopefully I keep everyone awake. Aside from that goal, my main goals for this talk are to compel you to conduct your own user interviews if you aren't already doing them, and to give you a few tips for how to run them. And if you are already running your own user interviews, maybe, just maybe, you'll take at least one thing out of this talk that might be helpful to you. And so the agenda for today is to go through user interviews, what they are, why to conduct them, when to conduct them, how to conduct them. I'm going to talk a little bit about a user research project I did around aspects and some of the findings that came out of that and what we did with those findings, and then I'll end with a call to action. So part one, user interviews. What are they? Why do them? When should you do them? A user interview is a research method where an interviewer asks participants questions about a topic, listens for a response, and then follows up with further questions for the user. And I bolded the last bullet point mainly because to me, a user interview really is a conversation with a user where you're sort of fishing for more information that you may not have known you needed to know. So I like to use user interviews when I have a whole nest of questions about a topic, a workflow, or a user segment. So examples of when I've done user interview projects in the past are, I've worked for companies that are thinking about sort of expanding into new customer segments, and we didn't really understand that customer segment. So that was a great source of information about that customer segment. And then here at Axum, since I'm new to the ed tech space, it was really helpful to do some user interviews when I first started thinking about aspects, just so that I could really understand what course delivery teams and course authors really need in terms of the data they're getting on their learners' engagement, performance, and enrollment in their courses. The experts say you conduct user interviews. Marty Kagan says to conduct user interviews, they'll help you learn who your users are, what their experiences are like, and why they need, what they need, value, and desire. And what better set of information to have when you're developing solutions, products, solutions for your customer. I'm sure some of the product people here probably know Marty Kagan. Teresa Torres is my favorite. She says that customer interviewing is one of the most valuable activities a product team can do. It's simply the easiest and most sustainable way of learning about your customers and what they need. And I've linked here, if you haven't read it, Continuous Discovery Habits is an absolutely fabulous book about talking to customers, making it easy. She has a lot of practical tips for talking to customers, mostly for engineers, product managers, and designers, but I think they could be applied sort of across the board. And so why do I think you should do user interviews? I'm going to start with an exercise. So let's pretend that we're an interior designer who is tasked with picking a carpet for an office building. Aside from knowing that you're picking a carpet from an office building, the company that hired you has sent you over some requirements. They want the carpet to be durable, for obvious reasons. They want the carpet to match their brand colors. Navy blue, off-white, gray. They want it to be mostly dark because people spill coffee. They want it to be patterned, and then they also want it not to be too thick. And so we're going to go through our swatches here, and we're going to, and I think this one matches the product requirements. Fair? Jill's suspicious.
My coffee was saying this.
That is true. Unfortunately, this is the one I've chosen. So you go to your site visit. The carpet's installed, you go to the site visit. You're walking down the hallway, it looks beautiful. You see a door, and you go through it, and this is what you see. An absolute battle of wit and will to get down those stairs, right? So I use this example mainly because I think it illustrates that context is very important. Knowing that there would be stairs involved and also how the carpet is installed is stuff that maybe you didn't think about because you didn't talk to the customer. And then a personal example, when I first started out in product management, I worked for a company that sold products directly to customers and then to distributors who would then send those products to customers, to end customers. And a lead in the organization I worked for came to me and said, I really want to fix our third-party distributor checkout flow. And I said, great, let me talk to the people who are placing orders using our third-party distributor checkout flow. And they said, sorry, you can't talk to our distributors. It's too important of a relationship. You're going to have to figure it out without that information, but I'll send you some requirements. So I looked at some data. Essentially, what I was finding is that these distributors would place orders on our one-page application, submit them, cancel them, and resubmit them. And so for me, that indicated that there was some sort of step that needed to force the user to review the order before they submitted it that was currently missing. And of course, as I mentioned, hold on a sec, I also got a list of requirements from the lead within my organization for things she wanted to see changed in the distributor checkout flow. And so I worked with a team of designers and engineers to develop a new, beautiful cart checkout system like you're all used to when you're shopping online. And we pushed it out into the world, and we all went to bed, and we came back, and there were a million emails. The thing that we did not know is that these purchasing agents, 30 or so per organization, were all using the same account. And so when one person was ordering this thing, they would see it on the other side of the organization, all one cart. So again, this is when I learned you really don't know what you don't know. Don't take things for granted. So hopefully if you aren't doing user interviews, I've convinced you, maybe you should. User interviews help you shape product requirements, mitigate risk, uncover important context you might not otherwise have, identify common themes among all of your users, and then also prioritize needs. Maybe one particular type of user has a not so acute need that isn't felt by the broader community. So maybe that's not as important as something that's acutely felt across the entire user base. So hopefully I've convinced you, and let's dive into how to conduct user interviews. So step one is really just, let's be messy, let's brainstorm, let's throw, what questions do you have about your user segment, your workflow that you don't know anything about, or process that you're noodling around. You can be messy, these are not going to be your interview questions. Just write them all down and then review them and think about who is the person closest to the answers. Those are the people you want to talk to. So in the third-party distributor checkout flow example, it wasn't talking to the lead within my organization. It wasn't talking to the head of the third-party distributor organizations. It was the purchasing agents I really needed to talk to. And so once you know who you want to talk to or what type of person you want to talk to, start telling everyone that you want to talk to them, people in your organization or sort of that you're interfacing with at work or within the community, who you want to talk to. So when I started at Axum and figured out I had so many questions about course authoring, course delivery, that's the process I took to identify who I wanted to talk to. I told everyone I wanted to talk to people in that sort of realm, and that's how I started coming up with a participants list. This takes a long time, so this is why, to me, this is step number one. So as you start gathering your participants, keep track of them. I think the most important thing on this slide that maybe isn't as obvious as the other columns is this notes field, because it's going to take a while for you to get a good number of participants. So it's helpful to have a place to throw reminders to yourself, like who connected you, who is a super user, who's brand new, time zones, that type of thing. So as you're gathering your participants, start thinking about those questions. What questions are you going to ask your users? Get them all down. Again, you can be messy at this point. The key is to start. And then review that initial list that you've drafted against your brainstorming list from step number 1 to see, what did I miss? And then throw that onto your draft interview questions list. And from there, we're going to start reviewing those questions for wording. So first, we want to make sure that our questions aren't leading. So when talking to course authors, I would start with, tell me about how you use course data. Not tell me about what you can't get from our system today that maybe you want to get. See the difference there? So not leading questions, and then I think also equally importantly, I like to call this the exercise. This is another tip for sort of framing interview questions. Who here likes to work out? All right. Who's brave enough to respond to how many days a week do you work out?
Not enough.
A number?
I don't know, not enough.
3? How many days did you work out last week?
Well, it was raining.
Exactly. Exactly. So the reason, I'm stealing this from Teresa Torres, I should also say. We always try to frame questions when we can in a real life scenario. A recent real life scenario if you can do it, depending on what you're researching, because you're more likely to get accurate information, right? I know that you want to work out 3 days a week, and I know that maybe that's typical, but last week it wasn't. So I just got all that out by reframing. Another thing, once you start asking about particular scenarios, it really makes the interview drafting process a lot easier, because you can start with how many days did you work out last week, and then you can dive into what were the workouts like? Were there lines for the machines that you were trying to get? Was the workout typical? If not, why? So couching things in real scenarios tends to make it a lot easier for a user to remember accurate information and for you to gather accurate information. So once you have all your questions sort of worded, edited, you can review them and make sure that each one has a job. So I like to actually write my user interview questions in an Excel spreadsheet and have a row next to each question called a purpose row. And if I can't articulate the purpose for asking that question, I delete it. Because your time with your user is extremely valuable, so you definitely want to prioritize and really focus on the questions that you're setting out to get answers to. The last question should always be, who do I talk to next? Because like I said, getting participants is one of the hardest and longest parts of a user research project. So when I was doing the user interviews for Aspects, I will say I got, I don't know, maybe at least 1 name, 2 names sometimes from each person I talked to. Did all of those people pan into interviews? No, but some of them did. So it's a really easy way to sort of build up that research pipeline without having to do extra work, right? You're already in the room with the person you're interviewing. If you haven't already, add a few context building questions at the top of the interview draft. So it's important to know the world your user is operating in. So here we have a learner. I want to know, is this learner working on mobile? Are they working on their laptop? What is the world around this learner? Are they at home? Are they in between coffee breaks at the office? Are they on a coffee break in the office? Are there distractions, right? Do they need content delivered in tiny, tiny chunks? Or are they able to sit down for long swaths of time? And then finally, just review your interview questions. Read through them and make sure the order makes sense. Generally speaking, you want to start off broad and you want to get more narrow. So I wouldn't start an aspects interview asking, tell me about your needs around enrollment rate for your courses. I would start around, tell me about the last time you looked at course data, and sort of narrow down to where is the interview taking you. So reorder those questions if you need to. Are there any questions that require follow-up questions or prompts that you're missing? Add those. And then finally, be honest with yourself. How long do you have with your user? It depends. For aspects, I asked for an hour to see if I would get users who would talk to me for an hour. And luckily, since the community is so willing to participate, everyone was cool with an hour. So I used that to really trim down how many questions can I realistically get through and basically put the ones that were least important on the bottom. Didn't delete them, but in case I had extra time, I'd throw them in at the end. This is sort of an obvious one. Draft an introduction to your interview. This is the thing that you read to the user at the beginning of the interview to provide them context for how the interview is going to go, and it should be brief. Keep it to a minute because a minute more is one less minute you have with your user. Let them know that you will be recording the interview and why. So for aspects, basically I said, I'm not going to share it with anyone. This is because I wasn't. If you don't say that if you are. I'm using this for notes. You can also, we'll get to this, but when you reach out, you should also mention that you will be recording the interview. Tell them what you're interested in generally without leading. So in talking to third-party distributors, if I were able to, I wouldn't have said, I want to know everything you hate about our third-party checkout system. Because again, I want to know the good, the bad, and the in-between. And I don't want to color what I'm getting from these users. Tell them what to expect. How long will it be? I'm going to start off with a few context questions, go into more of a sort of conversation. And then finally, if something already exists, make sure you tell the person you will not be hurt. Whatever they say in that interview is not going to hurt your feelings. I have the luxury of a product manager in saying, I'm not an engineer, I did not build this. You're not going to hurt my feelings no matter what you say in this interview. Whatever you say is helpful. And finally, reach out to participants. Write a short email script that includes, it'll be similar, this is the email you send to all of your participants. It'll be similar to your introduction. You'll tell them who you are, if they don't already know. What you're interested, again, without leading. What to expect from the interview, so how long it'll be, if you'll be recording it, if there's someone else in the interview. So for Aspects, I had Brian Mezek, one of our engineers on Aspects, sit in on a few interviews, and I let the person know ahead of time just so that that was already covered. The 1 hour was just for interviewing. Let them know that they'll be recorded, how long you'll need them for, and ask them for their availability, what time zone they're in, general email questions or email things, and then save the email script with your participants list. I like to do this just to keep everything sane and all in one place. And then with this, I like to, once I start sending out emails, I like to reach out to participants in batches. And this is mainly because sometimes a lot of people will get back to you right away. And if they do, you don't want to have to do all your interviews in the day or week following. You want to be able to stagger them out. At least that's how I like to work. I can't do more than 3 interviews in a day. And then finally, throw a link in your in the interview invite for the meeting. And then finally, I keep track of participants that I've reached out to, when I've reached out to them, when the interview is scheduled for, as a reminder of who I need to nudge. I'll nudge once. If they don't respond after the first nudge, I'll leave them alone. And then finally, we've got to the fun part, conducting the interview. So read your intro, record the meeting, ask your questions, ask follow-up questions that come to mind. So your interview, you can go in with a plan, but you need to be open to your interview going any which way, because you want to know the context you didn't already know. And be open to going off script. And one thing that's going to really help you with being able to go off script is not taking notes in the interview. I'm guilty of this, and I will say every time I've watched a recording of myself interviewing while I'm taking notes, there are so many times when I've missed the opportunity to think of a question in the moment that I would have loved the answer to. You can always reach out to your participants after the case, but they might not always answer. So keep an eye on the time, which reminds me. Thank them, and then add this link to your participants list. Just it's all in one place. After each interview, reflect. Were there questions, I think this happens a lot, were there questions you worded in a way where the answer you got made you realize that the question you were asking in your mind was a different question to the interviewer? So I like to take the 5 minutes after the interview to review how it went and make some edits to my user interview script if needed. And if I'm starting to get a lot of context for one part of the interview, I may move up some of those deprioritized questions in the script so I can start getting more information about the things that I haven't gotten to before. And then step 10 is the fun part, synthesize your findings. So generally, this is the process, but the next few slides I'll go over some artifacts you can use for synthesizing your findings and making sense of them. So review each interview recording and take notes. Review the notes and highlight those big takeaways. Recognize and group common themes. Synthesize your findings for each theme. So for aspects, I was able to synthesize findings around enrollment needs, performance needs, engagement needs. And then I also had a dual lens on each finding where I wanted to know these types of users, MOOC course delivery teams, may have a different perspective on learner demographics, for instance. So you'll see what comes to mind as you start going through things, but synthesizing findings for each theme is a critical step in that, and then prioritize based on how acute our needs for the broad array of your users versus a smaller subset of your users. And so some interview artifacts I've used that are very helpful, and again, my favorite, Teresa Torres. I threw a link on here to her blog where she goes into this in depth, but the interview snapshot is a great artifact for jogging your memory about what a particular interview taught you. It's also a good artifact if someone says, you've interviewed 10 people, what have you learned? Or tell me about these interviews. You could actually even make these slides. So it's an interview snapshot is a one-page summary of a single user interview. And the template is this. It's a participant, you throw the participant name at the top, a photo of the user if you have it. A memorable quote from the interview is helpful to sort of frame what you mostly took away from the interview, what the major theme of the interview was. It also helps you jog your memory. Any insights you derived from the interview. So an example of some insights from Aspects user interviews. Some users are extremely interested in looking at when people enroll in courses because it helps them figure out where those learners came from. If they're getting big swaths of enrollment for a particular period of time, they can isolate where those learners came from sometimes. Opportunities is the product optimistic term for what problems can I solve? So what opportunities were you able to identify from the user interview, if any? Quick facts. So some of this is just context, right? This person works at a university and has 100 courses on their Open edX instance. So context information. And then finally a user map, which is kind of like a visual of maybe the scenario you talked about. So think about if you were to map the user's journey using Post-it notes, the user map you would draw at the bottom for aspects an aspects user interview that could be a map of how someone goes through data or how someone gets data, what information are they looking at first, their journey through the data. It's a little easier with checkout flows. Right, what is your process when ordering an item from this company? I have an example of this on a future slide, so I can actually show you what it looks like. A comprehensive user map is all of the user maps you've generated, all synthesized, so you can see where distinct user journeys collide. Where are they the same? So an easy example of this is maybe I'm interested in the process of walking a dog. So if I'm interviewing a bunch of people who walk dogs, maybe this is a comprehensive user map. For the regular dog walker, who owns a dog, they'll put on their shoes and coat, put the leash on the dog, walk the dog, take the leash off, wipe the dog's feet, maybe, and take shoes and coat off. But also, you have a dog walker who accepts a client's job, drives to the client's house, does the dog walk, gets the money, goes home. So this would be a very easy example of a comprehensive user map, but just to illustrate that the part in the middle might be of most interest to you, and where they diverge might also be of interest to you. Again, there's a good blog article linked about this in these slides. And then finally, the opportunity solution tree. So this is, I could talk for 45 minutes about this. You can see Marco laughing to himself, but I won't. So an opportunity solution tree is a great tool for charting your path toward a desired outcome. I have an example on the next slide, but at the top you have your product outcome. Then you have your opportunities or things you want to solve. And then underneath are all the possible ways you could solve it. Pie in the sky thinking, you're not going to do all these solutions, but getting them all down on paper helps you really sort of map the world of possibilities, so you can start isolating on what possibility are you actually going to use or go for. So here is an example of a half filled out opportunity solution tree. So a product outcome, a hypothetical product outcome for the Aspects user interviews could be, I want at least 60% of course delivery teams to give a 9 out of 10 rating to their ability to access, understand, and use course data in the Open edX platform. And so what are the problems I could solve that might get me to that outcome? So maybe an opportunity could be, I want to give course delivery teams access, a way to access or view their course data. The other side of the coin could be, I want to make it possible for course delivery teams to use data to decide when and if to reach out to or nudge learners. You'll see the solution has not been filled out for this bottom bit on the other side, but let's look at some solutions for giving course delivery teams access to their course data. You could build a course dashboard equipped with ready-made reports. Spoiler alert, we did that with Aspects. You could give users a tool where they can build their own reports with course data. Also did that. And then you could also, here's a solution, is you could give users the ability to download some raw data files. This link here goes into this artifact at depth, if you're interested in it. So the next section is really just going through what are those insights we gathered from, or some of them, from the user interviews for aspects, and how do we implement solutions or answers to those insights. So here's an example of one. I want to know, as a course delivery team member, I want to know how many learners enrolled in my course, and I want to know like the enrollment breakdown, right? If I have a certificate track on my OpenEdX instance, can I see the breakdown of my enrollees for my course? And the implementation was this one graph, which is on the course dashboard in the enrollment section. Another finding was I want to know when learners enrolled in my course. Again, mostly because I want to see those massive jumps in enrollment if they exist, so I can identify where my learners came from, which brought us the cumulative enrollments by track graph in the course dashboard. I want to know if my course content is being used and where learners are dropping off. This implementation is a little experimental, but we'll see how it goes and see how we improve it. We have an engagement graph for page views, video views, and problem engagements across the course. So what you're seeing, these bars, are the section and subsections in the course. The green bars are, in this particular graph, are all the learners who viewed at least one page in each section across the course to see where you're losing learners. And then the red bars are your not special, but your learners who are doing everything in a given section or subsection. I want to know if my course content is doing its job to teach the concept I want to teach, or if it should be improved. And I want to know if my content is clear. And so the implementation for this, there's a few graphs in aspects that try to answer this question. Here are a few. So the problem results is in the problem engagement part of the course dashboard in aspects. I've blanked out course-specific information here, but you can look at your problem results. The percent correct or incorrect can indicate for you if things aren't maybe are too difficult for learners, or maybe there are parts of your course that aren't teaching what you think you're testing in these problems. And then also, how many attempts? What's the average number of attempts that you're seeing, the median number of attempts you're seeing for the problems in the course? And then another implementation that's trying to answer one of these findings is, if you're familiar with Insights, this is very similar to what exists on Insights, is the watched video segments graph, where you can look at the viewership of the entire video across the timestamps of that video. So along the bottom are the seconds, the second timestamp of the video, so you can see the sections where learners keep reviewing the video. Maybe those are not clear, maybe they're extremely important. And then finally, I want to know which learners are struggling with this course, unit, or problem. So which learners are struggling with this course, we've tried to start to scratch the surface with the at-risk learner dashboard in aspects, which provides, if your instance has aspects with limited personally identifiable information flicked on, you can get a list of the learners who potentially are at risk in your course. Those learners are learners who have enrolled in the course, who have done something other than just land on the homepage of the course, haven't been in the course for 7 or more days, and have not yet passed the course. The yellow bit is something I'm continuing to think about, and I know a lot of people are thinking about, is I want to communicate with the learners who are struggling in this course. And then finally, I'll end with a call to action, a two-part call to action. The first part is just a reminder of what I said at the top. Tell every person you interface with, and for me, that's all of you, who you want to talk to next. And I want to talk to people who could be interested or need to see information for their entire Open edX instance. So I want to talk to administrators, site operators. If you have any, my email's at the beginning of the slides, or come find me after. That's my ask from you. But in all seriousness, my actual ask for you is, if you are already doing user interviews and you are finding interesting things, we're all in an open source community, so please share them. The more of us who are doing user interviews, the more we're learning about our learners, our course delivery teams, our site administrators, our site operators, and it will help us make a better product for those users. So with that, thank you for letting me hopefully keep you awake. Does anyone have any questions? One second. We want this recorded.
I was wondering if you have any tips for conducting an interview when the person you're interviewing potentially knows a lot more about the product than you do.
Oh, I mean, absolutely. Because I'm coming from the biotech space and I studied art history. So I think honestly it's being curious, being open and upfront about where you might not understand things. Don't feel silly asking someone to clarify what they mean. An example of that in the user interviews I did for Aspects, as someone who, again, came from the biotech space, there were all these terms that all of you probably already know, right, about the ed space that I didn't know. And so I think the big tip is just not being embarrassed about asking what someone means by something, because otherwise the user interview is not as useful as it could be. So you're an expert in UX, you're an expert in user interviews. You're not going to be an expert in being a course delivery team, unless you are. I mean, maybe you had a previous life as a course author or something.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Someone else? Okay. I have a question about your snapshot. And yeah, so I find that like when we are summarizing so much, and sometimes videos can be super long, and it can take a long time. Do you have any tips for summarizing across users and knowing what to keep in and what to focus on? Because I feel like there can be so much noise that you can sometimes get a little bit overwhelmed by what data to present. Do you look at what people have repeated? Do you have any tips about that?
It is a great question because it's something I struggle with. I think going through user interview recordings take a long time. I want to say the notes I had for my initial pass were 30 pages. But I think once you get to the interview snapshot stage, and after you've interviewed 5, maybe 4 people, depending on how broad your user base is and how different their use cases are, you'll start to figure out, like, this is a problem that it seems like everyone has. I'm going to continue to test and make sure that's actually true, but maybe I don't need to write it down every time, right? If I get to my 6th interview, I'm writing down those things that are coming up for the first time or that are different, right? This person is saying they don't need demographics data because of this very important thing about their context. That's important to know. I don't need to know that that person wants to know about the enrollment in their courses because it turns out, it seems like everyone does. So I think as you start to digest more and more, you can get quicker and quicker at it, but I agree, it takes time. Yeah. And if anyone here, I mean, everyone here, I'm sure, who has done user interviews, if you have more to add, I'm happy to hear it, because I want to learn from you too.
Anyone want to add to that before I? All right, so sort of a two-part question. The first one is, at times it feels like earlier on in the definition of what interviews you should be conducting, the question formation, etc. Sometimes it is helpful to look at aggregate data to understand like the segmentations, the drop-offs, some of the things that you highlighted earlier on in the talk about like a pattern you were seeing in the actual usage when we were talking about the non-education example. So I'm curious sort of like what you see as the role for how Open edX could do more of that kind of aggregate quant style data, because, and this is the second part of the question, the real challenge to me seems to be, and we experience this on mobile as well, is we often don't directly have instance level data and have to rely on individual instances to help share that and provide that for us to do that kind of analysis. So curious sort of like how you've seen aggregate level quantitative data sort of like support the more qualitative interviews, and if you have thoughts on like the challenge of how to do that in the Open edX context.
Thank you for that difficult two-parter. So I think a good example of quantitative data informing, well, I hope this answers your question. I have an example from a previous role where we were looking at adding a new customer segment. And honestly, the quantitative data is what made me reach out to users. It was because we had been successfully selling products to an entire user base that loved them. And then we went to a new user segment and crickets. And so that information alone was what informed that I need to figure out why are these people why are they not buying from us? Because there were a lot of hypotheses. And it turns out, so the hypotheses mainly were around a particular element of the products we were selling related to IP. We thought that the segment cared about our particular IP clauses, which is a big hurdle to overcome. But after talking to these users, we found out that the products we made available to them were ones that were not of use to them. However, we had other products in our catalog that were of use to them. And so the quantitative data really informed that we needed to do a little more digging for Open edX. It is a question I got in my interview. It is a question I think about every day. It's a question that keeps me up at night. I think we can try to maybe do a concerted effort across the community to gather feedback and data, but I don't know. I'm sure people have tried, and I don't know what the answer is. I think we can. I'm more energized this conference to try and build partnerships with providers to try and get the data they're comfortable with sharing. But I don't know what's been done and what's worked and what hasn't worked. So I'd be happy to talk to you about it.
How many interviews do you usually make for something like that? I imagine that changed on complexity, but yeah, do you have like an ideal number?
Sure. So I would say if you read up on like long-winded user interviews, you can get what you need in as little as 3 to 5, depending on how sort of diversified your user set is and how confident you feel after doing a good set of interviews with customers that are different enough that you feel like you're kind of getting the whole picture. So it's a little bit of an art and a science. So because I didn't know anything coming into Axum, I will say I reached out to 15 people, I talked to 10. If I were Jenna or Marco, maybe I wouldn't have needed 10. So I think it depends on your context, how much information you have, as well as the varied amount of data you're getting. By the time I got to 10, I felt like I'm hearing the same thing. I've talked to people who are instructional designers at on-site contexts. I've talked to people who manage or think about 100 courses at their MOOC instance of Open edX, and I'm starting to get a pattern enough that I feel like I've got the full picture. So it's a little bit of an art and science. I will say 3 to 5 is generally accepted, but it really depends on how crazy different the users are, and unfortunately, we're in a space where there's a lot of different applications.
Thank you, Chelsea. That was great. I love this session because as a learning designer, I'm very focused on, audience analysis. So I'm like watching this and I'm thinking to myself, okay, what can I do better and, understanding my audience and their learning goals and what the course should be designed and all that. And sometimes my clients have a really good sense of their audience, sometimes not so much. So kind of going back to the example you gave, could you talk a little bit more about almost like guerrilla tactics or like other ways to get information about users if you're sort of more removed from them? I'd love to get some ideas from product people on that.
Yeah, if anyone else has responses to that, I know Marco definitely does, so give him a mic. I would say it depends on where you're working and if anything's searchable, right? We have the ability to we have discussion forums, we have Slack, so one very easy tactic is to search both of those things for terms. So when I started thinking about aspects, I searched data, course data, information, just to see what people are asking for. So if you have any sort of like database or collection of historic things, it's helpful to just do a quick search. It's an easy one. I think when people tell you something, it might be helpful. I mean, I don't know if you're able to ask the people you're working with, how do you know that? Maybe there's a more delicate way to phrase it, but really challenging some of the assumptions you're hearing and seeing if people are willing to let you join a meeting with them or connect with a user. I know sometimes, as I've experienced and expressed, that's not always possible. But I will think about other creative ways and I can reach out to you because there certainly are. I'm just kind of, I feel like that's what I can think of off the top of my head. Marco?
Sure. The thing that crossed my mind is somewhat connected, Xavier, to your question as well, which is like, there's research that shows when you have a simple single workflow usability problem that like 9 interviews is almost overkill. That you can do it in 3, 5, 7, like you said, right? But I think like back to the point of audience definition, like if you're trying to get input on a workflow that's really broad, like how do you author courses, right? So if you talk to 3 people, you're getting like tiny little dots and pinpricks, right? And why? It's because if you were to take a step and do a proto-persona exercise, even if brief, on the range of how course authors vary, you're going to find, they work by themselves. They build 1 course. They build 100 courses. They work in a team. They're in a hierarchy. Like all of a sudden, the very common ways that they vary are so big and so different that you need to talk to 3 solo educators to get a sense of how that subset of segment works. You might need to talk to 3 mega team, multi-group sort of like educators to understand the workflows and needs that they have. So the complexity of the persona and the segmentation of the audience definition often dictates the complexity of the interview space. But hopefully you, through data or other means, can talk to fewer people and focus on solving smaller problems instead of, good luck trying to interview all the educators.
I think another good guerrilla type way you could get data is by when you're at events, really just talking to people about, do you know a person who's doing this? Do you know a person who's thinking about this? To see if there's anyone you can be connected with that isn't a conflict of interest. And thinking about where your users are depends on what space you're in, but really trying to sort of network the problem. Thank you.